Welcome to the PokerRoad Radio Show, hosted by Gavin Smith, Joe Seabach, and Bart Hansen. PokerRoad Radio is the only radio show with so much bankroll they don't have to manage it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Day 4 of the North American Poker Championship from the Falls View Casino and Resort in Niagara Falls, Ontario. And we really have a special treat here tonight. Of course, Gavin Smith and Barry Greenstein joining us, but we are at the dinner break of Day 4, so we have 7 players left. And Barry, you are still in the tournament, something that we don't normally see because, you know, Joey and Gavin don't usually make that many final tables at WPT events. So to actually have a hands-on kind of experience with what's been going on at the table. Now you're down to 854,000, which puts you in 6th spot. Tell us what's been going on today.
Yeah, I'm hoping not to pull a C-back and go out on the bubble.
Yeah.
Well, one thing before we start this that I wanted to say, I've listened to the shows like when you did with Rolibus. This is probably going to be my last show, and the show will be a lot funnier when Joey comes in. And, as we know, as I said in the last show, it's like I'm the father of most of our listeners in age anyway. So instead of trying to be funny, I think I'm going to talk to them, the way I talk to my own kids. And so the thing I want to say first to everyone.
Go to your room.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say, you're close. I was going to say clean up your rooms.
Okay.
Before, if you haven't cleaned up your room, hit the pause button and don't come back till everything's picked up. And that goes for you guys too. I can only imagine what your room looks like right now.
My fiance got here, so it's fine. It's fine again. It wasn't that great before.
Thank God for housekeeping in hotels. That's all I have to say. It's just...
Okay. Anyway, now that I assume they've all cleaned up their rooms, they're back, now it's okay to listen. And you were asking about...
how's today gone so far?
About the tournament, well, some good and some bad. I started just over 600, went down to just over 300. And what happened is I picked up to 500, and then I had a race. I knew against Kofi, who's an aggressive player. Funny things I'd said before, if I get like ace-queen or 2 9s against him, I'm just going to have to go with it. And I got ace-queen. I raised, he re-raised, I moved in. And ace-jack's one of his favorite hands, and I was hoping he had that, but he had 2 8s. And we raced, and everyone knew what was going to happen. An ace hit on the river.
You Greenstein him.
I Greenstein him and doubled up. And I actually got up to like 1.3 or maybe even a little more. And then I took a couple shots with small pairs to flop sets that didn't work and bluffed off some chips against Scott. What happened, kind of unlucky, I guess, against Scott Clements. He kept the pot small, raised in. I called with 2 10s. Flop came queen 7-5, and he bet the flop. And I called with 2 10s, and then on the turn, 9 came and went check, and he checked behind me. So I said, okay, 10s is obviously good, and the 5 paired on the river, so that was a good thing. So I was pretty sure I had the best hand. I bet 100,000. He called. He had ace queen.
Wow.
So it surprised me. I was betting for value, and he was keeping the pot small. So that knocked me down, and I actually got us down to about 600 now. I think I'm at 830 at the break. So the hand that's actually most disappointing is a hand where Jeff Garza raises in for 40,000. I had 2 9s. Jeff, can raise an early position with some weak hands. I thought of raising, but he had 600,000 in front of him. So I decided to just call the 40,000. And now here comes Kofi in the blinds, making a re-raise to 110, which I was, of course, prepared to call. But Jeff went in the tank, and he eventually moved in and froze me out of the hand. Kofi had ace-jack like he always seems to have, and he's in love with that hand. He knocked down Cunningham out with it against 10s, but he made the call here, and the hands get turned over. He has ace-jack, and Jeff has ace-king. And, of course, now I wouldn't mind being in there, although it would be my tournament life. Actually, what had happened if I had called or if I had raised, I assume I would have knocked Kofi off his ace-jack. But anyway, so in these situations, you're always saying, especially when you see the guy had ace-jack and didn't have to play, you're saying to yourself, don't put a 9 up there. Well, what came up was 10-8-7 all diamonds, and I had the 9 of diamonds. So it's a flop that I probably was going to not only take whatever heat Jeff was going to deal, but if he bet, I probably was going to move in on him because I had him easily covered. So at this point, seeing that he had the king of diamonds, I'm envisioning how the hand would have gone, and he might have been pot stuck and decided to go with it. So I'm kind of hoping that'll draw out on my hand that isn't up there right now. But 6 of hearts came on the turn, making me a straight, and deuce on the river, black deuce on the river. And so that denied me winning a big pot. So I was pretty disappointed because here, of course, ace-jack is a hand that most people wouldn't have played.
I wanted to ask you about that because it's been a kind of a common theme, like you said, with Kofi and ace-jack. And it's something that I've been a little bit confused about, and I think some of our listeners are confused about. It seems like Kofi, throughout this whole tournament, is getting himself kind of pot stuck when he's made a big re-raise with what could be a dominated ace, like an ace-jack, and then he gets himself 2.5 to 3 to 1 to call a re-raise all in. Now, mathematically, if you have an ace, you're never going to be more than a 3 to 1 dog, right, even against a bigger ace. So where's the line? Where do you make that call with those hands, say getting 2.5 to 3 to 1? Now, this is a tournament, so not always mathematically correct to call.
Well, probably his biggest mistake isn't in making the call. But you have to ask yourself, you've got a man raising in an early position, which generally signifies a stronger hand than a late position. Then you've got Barry cold calling this raise. Barry's not probably cold calling with that many weak hands. So then you have to ask yourself, where's Ace Jack stand here? The really good chance is that one of these guys has a better ace than you, which is going to put you in a pretty uncomfortable spot. So I think the big mistake he ever makes there is in even calling the pot. I mean, I think Ace Jack should be pretty quickly in the muck in that spot. But to be re-raising it to 110 is a pretty awful play. And then, that after that, I mean, the call after that probably isn't all that bad.
Actually, it was that bad because he had to call. He put in 110. He had to call over 500,000 more.
Oh, so it was a lot.
So he wasn't getting 2 to 1 or anything like that. It was a terrible call, actually. And, of course, I'm more upset because he cost me a big pot. But one of the things I want to say about him, he's been pretty tough on me. I've come in middle position, late position. He's re-raised me, and I've had to fold my 10-8, even suiteds or whatever. He's put pressure, and I can see with chips, and he's had chips most of this tournament, he's just a tough guy to deal with when he's got chips. I think when he's mid-stacked as he is now, he's not going to be so tough because once you get him down a little bit, he's a guy that if he raises, you just chip it in.
He's actually the short stack now. I mean, he's really been a roller coaster. He's down to 568,000. Now, you said that you weren't really a big-time re-raiser a couple shows ago, and that's not really your style. It seems to me like with these internet kids, especially and a lot of the ones that play in the cash games too, when you only play 100 times deep, they're really big into, it's almost like game theory and ranges and making 3 bets with hands where they know that they can risk this amount of chips to accumulate this amount of chips, and they don't really need anything to make a 3-bet with. I mean, do you find that...
Pulling the squeeze players type thing, you mean?
Yeah, do you find that these guys are making these re-raises a lot more than what I guess you would call the live players?
Yeah, it is maybe a part of the game as it stands now where people are re-raising 3 times. They're doing it on a variety of hands. And it's tough. It's tough to play against those guys in tournaments, especially when they have you out-chipped. You can't just call and hope to hit the flop. And, I don't think I've played that effectively against players who've been doing it to me. I play better against those guys when they don't have too much and I've got them covered because then I just put it back on them. I just say, okay, right. You're going to raise me liberally. You're playing for all your chips. Right.
One of my big reasons that I've constantly said, Bart, is that my biggest reason for not re-raising pre-flop is to protect all the times that I choose to call with crap. I don't want ever to get into the spot where when I start doing some 3-betting, people knowing, okay, well now he's 3-betting, he's got to have a hand. He can't have the 7-6 offsuit or the 9-6 of diamonds or whatever. I want them to know that every so often I am actually flat calling with 2 aces or 2 kings or 2 jacks or ace king or 2 nines or whatever, or hands that I'm willing to take a lot of heat with. And so one thing I've noticed is, and a lot of it might come because sort of my game's out there for a thing, but I don't find people squeezing me very often. When I flat call, I often find myself in 4 and 5 way pots, but it doesn't get raised behind me with someone just trying to squeeze out the action very often.
Well, because there's a possibility you could be flat calling with a big hand as well, right?
Well, I like to think that's possibly the reason. Maybe I'm giving myself way too much credit here, but I like to think that's part of it anyways. But, I think that if you get into the habit of 3-betting every time you have a good hand, then when you choose to flat call, it gives somebody the license to come in there and exercise the squeeze play on you.
Now, I don't know if your opponents are that sophisticated, noticing all these things. Although you're right, your whole play, is supposed to work together as a system, and you do things to protect other things. But I would expect that most people kind of treat you like I do, and that is when you enter a pot, I don't even notice you're there. I just act like your hand doesn't even count.
Like I don't have anything.
Yeah.
I don't usually.
No, there was a big hand right before the break, and this was one of the local players, Cheryl DeLeon, who satellited into this tournament, and she just basically got bluffed with total air from Scott Clemens. Scott Clemens, who's won 2 World Series breaks. It's really been on a tear recently. Used to play online and now plays live. And she was bluffed out of a hand on a queen-high board. I think the flop was queen 9-4. There was a heavy check raise on the flop. The turn was a blank, and the river was a king. And Scott fired big on the river, and she folded. And Scott just showed total air. Now you were there for that hand, right?
Yeah, the hand took a long time, and when Scott check raised her on the flop, I said, well, she might even have a set because she called pretty confidently on the flop, like there was no doubt about it. Now we bet 350 on the turn after the 9 paired, the second card paired. And again, she called like I'm going for the whole thing. And, he knew it, everyone knew it, but when she called there, I said she's got really... If she's got a good hand, she's even got queens full, and she doesn't want to scare him off. If she's got a weak hand, the weakest hand I imagine is king, queen, or ace, queen. And so, but it seemed like she was prepared to call the last barrel. Now, here comes Scott when the king comes on the river, and he pretty quickly just says all in. And one thing didn't make sense, and that is, I pretty much knew that either she's got the total goods or has ace-queen. Ace-queen's the most likely. Although I felt at the time when she called, if it was ace-queen, that she's better off just moving in for the rest of her chips. She had another $700,000, or even on the flop, playing back before the 9 paired. I was worried for her because I'm rooting for her because I assume Scott's a better player. That Scott maybe check raised her with the 9 and now made 3 9s on the turn, and I was thinking, well, if she only had ace-queen, she probably should have played back at him on the flop. But anyway. So now on the river when he fires, I said, well, I haven't played much with Scott, but I said if he really has, a full house or some sort of big hand, the bet doesn't make sense because he knows the king's probably a bad card for her because she's got most likely ace queen or a hand that will immediately call. And why would you want to bet that much? Because you're probably not going to get paid off. So that was the confusing thing to me. So I said, if he's got a good hand, he's probably making a bad bet. And if he's bluffing, then he's probably making a good bet because it's going to be real hard for her to call here with ace-queen. And you better hope she doesn't have king-queen because she still might call this. Now, as soon as she went in the tank, I said, okay, she's got the ace-queen and she's going to fold. And the tank took a long time, and where we all had a chance to think whether we thought he was bluffing or not. And I think everyone at the table figured he was pretty much putting his tournament life on the line. He only had 200,000 or 300,000 more than her, and that there hadn't been anything aggressive. People have been sitting back trying to knit their way to the final table for the most part, which is usually the way things are done. And so I think the consensus was he's probably got something good. He's got the best hand. He can beat ace queen.
Now we're shooting this or recording this audio with 7 people left, and Cheryl, who I was actually watching an interview, said that she played with you on the first day, Gavin. So I want your opinion of her because we're doing this with 7 people left. We don't know what's going to happen. She could go on and finish second or first, and it could be a major story. She's, I think, second or third to last in chips now. It seems like every time I play in these tournaments or I play next to an unknown woman in No Limit Hold'em, I always tag them as kind of weakish tight at first until they prove me wrong. What is your opinion of how she's played so far?
Well, we didn't play for long, but I think she's tight. She didn't seem to get too creative when I was at the table. Mind you, it was the early stages. I'm not positive what her experience level is going to be at this stage, and whether or not she's going to adapt to the blinds and antes going up rapidly, as quickly as guys like Barry, who's been there, Scott Clements has been there, Jonathan Little's been there. You're starting to get at a table where you've got some pretty experienced guys that understand how quickly things go up and how you have to increase your level of aggression at certain stages of this from here on out in this tournament. And I don't think Cheryl's going to be able to adapt to that very well.
She's played pretty solid, but and there was one hand that I was afraid of. Of course, the big hand today that she got all her chips, she had a cold deck in her favor. She had aces someone had queens and Dan Shack had ace king.
Dan Shack did this again. I mean,
aces, queens, and ace king.
Where it was this. This is another. I've seen this happen about 2 or 3 times in this tournament where he was the third guy in, having to call all his chips, and he's got ace king. And from what I read, I don't know if it was as quick as it did. It didn't seem like there was much thought that he was just going to throw it all in there with the ace king.
Yeah, well, obviously you can make a case. We had a hand yesterday where the guy folded ace king and should have called, Lee Markhold, and it's easy after the hand's over. And I'm not saying he should have called, but you still say he didn't have to get dealt ace king when someone got aces. In a tournament, very often when you have ace king, someone else has aces, the only way you do get away from it is when there's a third player in.
Right.
But this particular situation, that third player didn't have a lot of chips. So he still has to make a call. Is she trying to freeze him out, which often someone raising, may even do with an ace-queen to freeze out the other guy. She's not a freeze-out with ace-queen type of player, frankly, and that's what we've been getting to, is that's not likely with her. His call with ace-king might be better against someone else.
Well, we're going to take a little break, and we will be back with Hand of the Day and a couple of emails and a phone call from the North American Poker Championship here on PokerRoad Radio. And we are back here on day 4 of the North American Poker Championship. We've got 7 players left from the Fallsview Casino Resort in Niagara Falls, Ontario. And I want to get into the Hand of the Day. Of course, we do the Hand of the Day every day. And this one was really interesting, Barry. And I don't know if you were on this particular table, but it was kind of a combination of slow play and then kind of a defensive play. I'll go through the hand and correct me if I have any of the action that you know of incorrect, but Scott Clemens raises to 35,000 and David Cloutier calls from the small blind. The flop comes king 7-4 and both players check. The turn is a 4 and Clemens bets 40,000. Cloutier min raises to 80,000 and Clemens calls. So the board's king 7-4-4. The river is a 5 of clubs, backdoor clubs come in, and Cloutier checks. Remember, he had made the min-raise. Now he checks the river. Clemens bets 125,000, and Cloutier calls showing ace-4. Clemens turns over kings full and takes down the pot. So I thought that was pretty kind of an incredible thing that ace-4 didn't lose all that much. And I'm assuming that the action got shut down because he was scared of backdoor clubs. And
the flush draw comes and
possibly kings full.
Well, there were a couple of things that happened. Do you remember when we talked about my hand where I flopped top set and bet it? Because I didn't want to give away that, I'm checking when I have a real good hand. Well, that's what Scott did here, is he flopped a real good hand, and it's strange for Scott to check the flop, and he did that to start. If he would have bet the flop, I guess in all fairness to him, actually, from what Cloutier has been doing just with one pair, if he would have made a small bet, I think I'm going to sneeze. No. If Cloutier, I guess he did get more money there. Clemens, if he'd have bet the flop. Cloutier may have called and may not have. But he checked. He flopped top set. The nice thing about it was king 7-4 is not a dangerous board, but there are 2 hearts up there. I would have still bet it. But now that he checked and the 4 came off, now he made a small bet, which looked strange. Because if he could check the flop but bet now, you're wondering, does he just have something? Was he really afraid of a flop that just had one big card? And so I was at the table, and when he got check raised, usually when the person checks on the flop, bets on the turn, and can call a raise, then all the bells and whistles go off. You say, okay, it wasn't that he was afraid of the flop, it's that he was afraid of losing an opponent on the flop. So whenever you get that kind of action, you say, okay, I've got to shut it down. I'm not sure if Cloutier is a good enough player. He's the most inexperienced player we have at the final table, or at the final 7, I guess this was, or wherever it was. But he should immediately perk up when that happens.
Well, if I flip this hand around, and let's say that the river came and it was a 5, but it wasn't a club. I mean, there's a small possibility in that range there that on the turn, maybe he did check, maybe he had ace-queen or ace-jack of clubs, picked up nut clubs, bet, called him in, check raise, made a flush at the end.
So everything means that the 4 is supposed to keep the pot as small as possible, because if Clemens didn't have much and that's why I didn't bet the flop, you can't get paid off. And so you're probably better checking to induce a bluff, or if somehow it's there, or really just being afraid of clubs or a full house.
I think that probably a better play by Scott on that board, especially against an inexperienced player who might be like just thinking a hand like ace king's good, or might have flat called with whatever, a lot of variety of big hands, or could easily have the 4. Is at that point, I think once you get check raised, the min check raise on the turn, why not put in a big bet there and try and sell that you could possibly be on a draw and moving him off, a made hand, and see if this guy wants to make a big call. You never know when players, especially inexperienced players, want to make a big call with just a king there.
You're saying you would have wanted Scott to 3-bet it there?
Yeah, I like if he chooses to check the flop, which he did.
Right.
Okay, given that action, now he bets the 40 on the turn, and the guy just min raises it to 80. Well, I say give him a chance to make a big call with just a king, and try to sell what you'd do if you had maybe clubs. Maybe make it it's at 80, maybe make it like 280 or something like that, or 300,000. Put in a big raise there. And let the guy decide whether or not you're making a move with a draw or actually have a hand.
Well, the thought process there, too, that I would think if someone were to have an ace-4, if you make a 3-bet on the turn there, he might think, well, he can't possibly have kings full here. Why would he do this here on the turn? But my question to you is, if the river comes an offsuit 5 and either one of you guys have ace-4, are you perked up to the point where you're going to check and call or bet and fold to a river raise?
Well, it's easy to say now.
Yeah, it's very simple.
But the point is, the hand doesn't make sense. Whenever someone checks the flop and calls my raise, it just doesn't make sense to me anymore. I know that situation very well. So what I usually say is, I'm probably not going to get paid off if he just didn't have anything anyway, so maybe I should check to get him to bluff. That's probably my best way to get chips rather than betting it. So I kind of put those two together and play it that way. Adding to what Gavin said earlier, though, about how Scott should play it, when you're in that situation, you get min raised. You think of, and you got the nuts, the obvious nuts. You think of 3 ways to do it. One is because you're in position behind. That's a different dynamic than if you were in front of the guy. You'd be afraid to just call because it might go check on the river, and you got the top card filled. So it's normal, frankly, to just call when you have the nuts and you're not going to get drawn out and figure I'm going to get more action coming to me, especially against an inexperienced player. So that's not strange. But you can do the Gavin thing, thinking, especially this was a guy, Cloutier, who generally doesn't dictate the action. He was more of a passive player, and he rarely put in raises. And when he did, he usually had the goods. So you might feel you can get called on a re-raise. But if he's more experienced than I think, then he might also, again, be aware that this has all signs of having a full house. 7's full, probably more likely than king's full, being afraid that maybe a king could come off and kill him. You know what I'm saying? But one other thing I've seen people do successfully, especially in tournaments. Remember, in tournaments, winning smaller amounts is actually crucial. You don't play the big pots that you often play in side games because the chips are so dear you don't have that many multiples of the big blind often. What I've seen people do successfully is kind of re-min raise or not that much raise 60,000, because what that does in this situation is it means that you'll get some money and you keep the betting open for the guy to make a mistake. And so I've even seen people do this on a board of like queen 10 where someone's even had queen 10 or ace queen and they got min raised by someone with a 10, and now they re-min raised figuring, well, I want to keep it open, and the guy just made a big push at them figuring, well, I better not let him get a cheap draw on me. So keeping the betting open sometimes can really give you some rewards with the nuts.
We get an email here from Grant Combs, and I want to get to this again. Everyone can email us at prradio@pokerroad.com. Again, that's prradio@pokerroad.com. And Grant says, hey guys, love that you're all back. And Bart, I still have a subscription to Live at the Bike. Wanted to ask everyone, but particularly Barry, his thoughts on Kenny Tran. I've played with him 4 or 5 times, and he's a very, very scary no-limit player. I pretty much decided I would never play out of position against him with a huge hand. But what do you think about his tournament game, his no-limit game, and mixed game? My buddies and I flipped out when he called with Jack High in limit poker. Thanks, guys. Love the show. We all played in the horse tournament, and he did well, the 50,000 horse tournament at the World Series. And what did he get, 4th in that? Is that right? So that was pretty impressive. What do you guys think about him? or your experience with him?
I have almost none. I've played a little bit of no limit with him, a little bit of cash no limit with him, and I thought he played well. And I've talked to a few guys that play with him. As far as I know, he plays very well. I've never played mixed games with him, and I've never played tournament with him. So I'm kind of out in the dark. But my assumption is from people I've talked to is that he plays pretty damn good.
Kenny's a Hold'em player, and he's got a really good reputation in no limit Hold'em, and he initially got his reputation as a limit Hold'em player. So I think he's got the Hold'em pretty tied up, in the cash games, and everyone accepts that he's a good player. In the horse tournament, he was definitely a fish out of water in some of the other games, especially the stud games. And he was one. I lost 4 big pots when we were down to 9 players. One of them to him, where he made a flush on the river against my aces up, beat me a big pot, or I'd have had really good chips. But anyway, in horse, he's not a threat. He's not at the caliber that he could sit down at the game at the Bellagio and be a favorite. Because it's different. It's hard to get practice in those stud games playing against good players, especially if you're like Kenny, going around playing the no limit circuit. Circuit meaning in the LA area, at the Commerce and some private games. But he's a sharp kid. From what I can tell, he's a nice guy. And from what we saw on TV, he's willing to make a big call. And the question is how many big laydowns he makes, and I don't have enough experience with Kenny to know if he's just that great a hand reader, or if he's a guy who's always going to be in there making the big call.
So here we go. We're going to take a phone call. As always, you can leave us a voicemail at 877-836-ROAD. That's 877-836-7623. And here we go with a voicemail from today.
Hey guys, this is Steve from Skokie. Love the show. Quick question about cash game poker. My standard game is a 3-5, no limit, 500 max buy-in game. My question is about limp raising. I like to play big pots with aces, kings, maybe queens. How late of a position do you guys normally limp raise from, or do you even limp raise at all? I just find that I can easily get paid off when I play like that. Thank you.
This is a really interesting question because I've seen guys, I think Helmuth did it a couple times at the World Series. This guy's speaking about cash games, but I've seen it in tournaments too, where some people have that in their game where they pull the limp re-raise from really late position, like from the cutoff or from the button. So what do you guys think?
I do limp re-raise from many different positions. I limp with a lot of pots, so that sort of goes into the whole strategy again. I limp with a lot of garbage, so I like to throw in a lot of limping with big hands too. And then I also do small raises with big hands as well. So I mean, I don't really worry so much about where I'm limp re-raising from, is just so much as the flow of the game I'm trying to exercise at that time. So if I'm in a period where I'm limping a lot, then I'll limp a lot with big hands as well. And if I'm in a period where I'm doing a lot of small raises, then I'll put in the small raise. I try to just keep it consistent.
And also, are there some hands that you will limp re-raise with that aren't, say, aces, kings, or queens, or ace-king suited, obviously, so that you don't define your hand, right?
Yeah, there's quite a few. It's for me, limp re-raising is more of a situational thing. If you've chosen to limp with, say a hand like 7-6 of clubs or something like that, and a person who you're going to be able to sell on having a big pair chooses to put in a raise, well, that's an opportunity to pick up a lot of chips there without having to risk. Really a flop. It's going to work such a high percentage of the time against the right opponents. So I think it's just situational as to who you're doing it against.
Well, since I raise a lot with my garbage, I raise with my big hands too normally, and I don't limp a lot. But as Gavin said, in his game, since he limps with these other things, he's got to mix it up as far as what he limps with. So it's one of those things where it all plays together. So it's reasonable for him to do it. But I think the main criterion for limping with these things and limping with them late is who are the people to your left. And if you're playing with people who always see a limp as weakness and they're going to raise you, then okay. For instance, when I play Pot Limit Omaha with Sammy Farha, I limp into him. Pot Limit Omaha is more of a limping game anyway. But I slow play everything into Sammy because I know it's going to get raised. And Gus is another guy I slow play a lot of things into. I limp in. And they're going to raise, and I'm going to re-raise. And since I know that they just can't help themselves, that's how I play against them. So I think, although it's systemic with what you do with the rest of your game, I think more important is who's to your left and will they raise you most of the time, or a good enough percentage of the time when you limp.
One of the things I always saw, especially too recently coming up in no-limit cash games, especially at the 5-5, 3-5, 5-5, even 5-10 level, is some of these guys will limp with the intention of limp re-raising, so they'll limp in with aces, and then they won't get the re-raise. So now they're at a 7-way pot in a cash game, and the board comes out 6-5 deuce with 2 spades, and they've got 2 red aces, and they overcommit, or they have no idea how to play the hand afterwards, whatsoever.
Yeah, you're right. And that's one of the dangers. And it's not only a danger because, obviously, if you're in a 5-way pot, aces aren't that strong anymore when you didn't hit one. But it's like one of these psychological things. You feel so upset that no one raised and you still got aces that a lot of times just say, well, maybe this is the way I'm going to make the big pot anyway, that the guy's got a draw or only has top pair. And so very rarely do you get away from aces in this situation either, unless it's a 3-way betting situation.
Yeah, I mean, aces are just such a funny hand because you look down and you're just seeing this monster. You've got this monster, and people just think it's a monster all the way through, and it gets in a. I mean, you can get in a lot of really uncomfortable situations with aces after the flop, and that's just a hand that you're just going to need a lot of experience to play after the flop, because it is easy to commit your chips with. You've got the best pair. You really, when you've got 2 aces, it's pretty much the same as having bottom set. And, nobody gets away from bottom set. Jonathan Little got all his chips in with the 3-8s, no problem. And aces is a very similar hand.
Isn't there like 2 pair in between there somewhere?
I guess. But
bottom 2 pair,
yeah. It's very similar.
Yeah.
Having aces is very similar to having that hand like that, especially on a nondescript board.
Well, one thing before we head over to commercial that I want to chime in here, too, as well, is, you play in a lot of tournaments. But, again, when this guy's talking about cash games, aces is just one pair, and especially when you start playing deeper and deeper, sometimes you can just get away from it. I almost find in tournaments when you have aces, it seems like a lot of times when there's heat, it's almost proper to call because most of the time the hand is good anyways, if you follow me. What I mean by that is I'm amazed how good aces are on the flop when people make moves in tournaments, especially when they're making moves to accumulate chips. I mean, do you agree? Again, I don't mean to be overgeneral.
Yeah, that's. Again. I mean, it depends on who's making the moves and who's doing the things, and what the board is. If there's a lot of draws on the board, or if there's no draws on the board. If you've shown strength beforehand, and the flop comes down Jack 7-3 with all 3 different suits, and you've already shown a lot of strength, and then you put out a big bet again, and somebody throws in a huge amount of action on you. Well, your aces are generally usually beat there. I mean, it sucks when it happens, but. I don't think you can just all of a sudden say, in tournaments that, when you've got aces that they're going to be good. It depends on how the betting goes and who's doing the betting.
Yeah, and as we said before, only the very beginning stages of the tournament are like a deep stack cash game, and very quickly you're playing short stack poker. When you're playing short stack poker, you don't throw aces away.
Right.
So we're going to head over to a commercial, and we will be back here to wrap things up on PokerRoad Radio. Welcome, everybody, back to PokerRoad Radio's coverage of the North American Poker Championship from the Falls View Casino Resort in Niagara Falls, Ontario. We have a very special guest here wrapping it up at this WPT stop. It's the tournament director, Jason March. Thank you very, very much for coming on the show, Jason.
Thanks very much for having me.
Always a pleasure. We usually
always a pleasure. It's the first time he's been on. What do you mean?
Well, it's always a pleasure to have a guy in the poker business, not a poker player, on the show. That's what I was going to say. I mean,
If that's what you're going to say, why didn't you just say it?
Right off the bat, man.
Come on, leave.
Right off the bat. So many questions go into, how do you organize a tournament? And I think tournament directors get so much flack for some of the things people think that they do wrong. Yeah, exactly. Just like Gavin was giving you trouble right before the show. What does it take to put on an event like this? I'm sure people don't realize the magnitude of, how big it is to plan something like this.
It starts in detail about 6 months out from the start of the tournament with satellites and planning. And here we have to do many submissions to our gaming commission or receive approvals. So there's a great deal of work that goes on early, and then there's a lull in between, and then about 2 months out is when it really picks up for us. And that's when all the planning and banqueting and all the other departments come together.
Now for people that don't know, the tournament's going on down here in a ballroom or a banquet room or a
in our ballroom. We have 5 ballrooms, and the tournament area takes up 2 of them, and then the final table will take up 3.
And I think some people don't realize that some of these casinos that we come to on the WPT tour, their poker rooms aren't big enough, obviously, like a Bellagio or some other places, to accommodate the size of the tournament. So it's into a different area. One of the things I was wondering about as well was with the whole currency thing over the last few months. Has that really screwed with, some of the planning, or how has that affected the actual value of the American dollar to the Canadian dollar? How has that affected the planning for the tournament?
Well, it greatly affects it. I believe it was approximately $10,900 US to get into a $10,300 tournament, and last year I think it was around $9,000 US to get in. So it's quite a drastic increase for a lot of the players that are traveling here from the States and from overseas. So, I mean, $2,000 difference approximately in 1 year. That's usually the expenses to get here and stay for the week.
I guess it's nice for you, though, that the only thing I knew that Canadians ever bragged about was national health care and that their side of Niagara Falls was better than ours. And now they get to brag that their dollar's better, too.
Yes. We've taken a beating about our monopoly money and the worth of our dollar for the last few years, so it's nice to give it back now.
Is there anything else you guys have to brag about, or is it just those 3 things?
Well, I don't know. You guys just took, I see in your national advertising campaign to bring people to the States, you just took a picture of our falls, too, and started using that instead of the American falls. So
on the Canadian side, really?
Yeah.
I think you were a no-nonsense guy, but you told me you were a friend of Gavin Smith, and that threw that whole thing out the window. How did that happen?
I have to be no nonsense on the floor, but I like to go out at night too. And Gavin and I first got to know each other a couple of years ago at one of the final tables that they sent me down to train at, and we just clicked.
As I said, it has a pretty much Big Brother feel here with looks like marshals at every table. I don't know if they're floormen or what. And you've told me that there are restrictions that the gaming committee puts on you. Yet last year, the players had a lot of input. Last year was your first year, and it seemed like you guys were pretty flexible. So I'm confused what you can do and what you can't do.
We have to submit ahead of time and receive all our approvals in advance. So we have to lay everything out in minute detail, receive approvals for those, and then we can go from there and run the event. Right down to last year, we didn't submit that we could display the bracelet on the final table. It wasn't in the first submission, so we couldn't put the bracelet on the final table. So it's very detailed. It makes my job easier at times. It restricts a lot, and so we have to make sure that we cover every single detail going in, but 6 months early. So we have to make sure we have everything covered. That's why I wanted to listen to the players last year, get some input. We want to run a first-class event and run an event that people will travel and make this a premier stop.
But didn't you change like the chip amount, the buy-in, or the chips you got, or the structure?
I thought we added a level last year.
I thought like even added a level, so that sounds like something. A lot of times the World Series, I think they can do that, but the payouts I know right now they're restricted. So you were able to make changes, and obviously, so did you have to get approval at the last minute or what?
I can change from year to year. And there is some flexibility once the tournament starts. As the tournament director...
Or maybe I shouldn't talk about it and they didn't know and you snuck something in on them and I'm getting you in trouble. And
we do have some flexibility. They do allow us to make subtle changes in between, and sometimes we do have to notify them during the event, but for the most part we try and limit it strictly to what's in our submission.
Well, okay, I'm sure you've heard from most of the players that they think it's a great structure. Hour and a half, you're not going up too fast. We have plenty of chips to play. As we're doing this right now, I'm still in with 7 players left, and I was the short stack, but I was in no hurry. I still had good chips to play with. I had 40 times the big blind, even though I was the short stack.
Well, I believe at this point right now we're 3 or 4 levels ahead of last year's pace. That we were able to take yesterday off because of that. But the beginning part of play in the early part of the tournament was much, much quicker than last year.
When you have something happen that's some sort of rules issue that you guys are put to the test with some sort of decision, can you talk about maybe one of the biggest decisions you've had to make in one of these tournaments in years past?
Last year we had 2 situations where players called an all-in wager and then mucked their hand face down, and unfortunately their cards weren't retrievable, and it did cost them their tournament. This year we haven't had any major decisions that affected anybody's tournament life. Fortunately. But what I've done is myself and one other supervisor, we've trained in great detail over the rules and irregularities, and we're the only 2 that make calls on irregularities. Anything out of the absolute normal irregularities, we're involved just for consistency and for recourse
And for
at a later time.
people that aren't familiar, okay, for a WPT tournament, is there actually a specific set of rules that governs every single tournament and every single situations, like a rule book, like a tournament rule book, that you base your decisions on?
We have a standardized set of rules of play that we go by, that we govern our poker room by. That covers some irregularities, but you can't ever put into print every single situation that can happen. So you have to have the main clause that the tournament director or designee can make any rulings that come up and arise that aren't in print.
One thing you said, I overheard you saying, was that this should be the biggest $10,000 or Canadian or U.S. whatever event outside of the main event of the World Series. What do you base that statement on?
First and foremost, our facility I think is equal to anything worldwide. 19 years of age of entry, which is very big for online players and a lot of the kids that are playing nowadays. Tax-free winnings, which is big for the Europeans. I know the Americans still have to claim taxes, but we give you cash however you like it, cash, check.
You didn't get that big a European turnout this year, it seemed.
We did have competition this year from
an EPT event in
EPT Dublin. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That probably did make a significant difference.
Yeah, we didn't have that last year, and we did get quite a few Scandinavians and Europeans come over that we didn't see this year. So
different from the World Series, if a European comes over to the World Series and they're from a country that doesn't have a tax treaty, right? Mm-hmm. They do have money withheld, but here
we don't withhold from anybody. No.
Right. So obviously that's going to be a pretty big incentive for some of those guys.
Not to mention the fact the area of Niagara Falls can draw on a lot of seriously heavily populated and economically strong areas. With all of the Toronto area being so close, plus when you can get into the New York area of the States, which isn't all that far away, I think you can draw a lot of people here that it's not difficult for a really huge population to get to.
We're about a 7-hour drive from New York City and Boston, so we're within a 7-hour drive. There's probably another 30 million people in population.
Yeah, 500's a good number, which is what you got, 504, but it doesn't compete with Foxwoods and Bicycle or Commerce. Those are getting more, and so we see some of the Europeans didn't come, and also it seems like one of the problems is you don't have a big place to run satellites.
Correct. Our poker room is 16 tables, so we're one of the smallest poker rooms actually on the World Poker Tour. We do satellites. We did satellites this year for 4.5 months, and we had almost 15,000 people playing them. So our satellite structure is strong, but we don't have a big enough room, and we're not allowed to run super satellites as of now. We're hoping to be able to fix that if we do future events.
Now, one of the players who's a local, right, Cheryl, do you know if she got in through a satellite, one of those satellites?
She did. She got in through one of the $1,200 single table satellites.
And I really want to pimp out your card room. I mean, even though it's only, you run the poker room, which is upstairs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a different area. Over the last couple of nights, I've had the opportunity to play cash games in there, and it seems like it's well staffed. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of staff, and the action is just, it's absolutely amazing. I mean, I play regular 10, 20, and 2040 no limit at the Commerce in LA, and people say, well, that's the wildest game. I mean, I've been playing the last 2 nights here. I wanted to play around these tournament donks because I figured, that's when the game's going to be good. But around the locals, the action is unbelievable. I mean, talking about in a 10-25 game, $25,000 pots. I mean, is that normal?
Our 1-2 no limit game has a $100 cap on the buy-in. So if 10 players come to the table, there's $1,000 on the table. We've had $5,000 to $10,000 pots on a 1-2 no limit game with a $100 max buy-in. So the money in the games is ridiculous. We had 2 50-100 no limit games going this week, which doesn't have a cap on the buy-in. And Mike Mattisau was saying that it's the best walk-up games he's seen anywhere in the world in any casino.
That's because Mike was in it.
Yeah, he doesn't play in a bad game.
But about half of those players in those games were local, so we do get strong action on a regular basis. 10-25 goes every weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and 10-20 is a daily game. 10-20 no limit. So
I mean, I really have to put the recommendation forward for anybody in this area to come check it out. It was the most unbelievable.
Are you trying to say you won, Bart? Is that?
I did take some money off of the table. How unbelievable that might be. Yeah. But yeah.
Okay, I figured that we were going to get to that.
Yeah.
One other thing I noticed here was the casino. Obviously, the poker room was overflowing because it's not that big, and it couldn't handle all the requests to play. The casino is bustling, too. They've got a lot of action, a lot of people playing, the restaurants everywhere. But it seemed like outside there really wasn't as much going on like you would expect the local businesses to really be bustling now, too. Now, I was wondering, the ideas I came up with, and then you can help me whether I'm right or not. that is just this time of year. This is when the Maid of the Mist closed down, and it's getting a little colder here. So maybe the warmer seasons when the businesses around here get more play. And also the other obvious thing is the stronger Canadian dollar. What kind of effect has that had on tourism?
It's definitely had an effect on tourism. I mean, 3 years ago it was close to 50% exchange rate. Players would come over with $1,000 US and get $1,500 to play with. Now they're getting $900 to play with. Same goes for tourists. When they come over, they're not getting the bang for the buck. But this time of year, come October, Niagara Falls tourism drops significantly compared to June, July, and August. Once the kids go back to school and businesses start back up, and once the weather starts to turn. It's a big golfing destination as well, so that's why you see the drop-off at this time of the year.
Yeah, we heard from Gavin. Although he went over the border, but I heard...
No, I played once over here, too. I played
at the John Daly course?
No, I played Whirlpool, which actually years ago used to be the best course in the area, and then I think they've built 2 new sort of PGA caliber courses in the area since then, but the place I played was still nice.
Yeah, Whirlpool's still one of the best, but there's been 3 significant courses added within the last 5 years here. And we just had an LPG at one of them 2 or 3 years ago. Greg Norman opened a course here, and John Daly opened a course here.
Okay, yeah, this is... a great destination. Anyone who hasn't been here and hasn't seen Niagara Falls really ought to come. And probably the spot that Canadians are proudest of with good reason. It's amazing.
There's lots to do here for families, and as a destination, an off day isn't a bad thing during a poker tournament and when you come to Niagara Falls.
One of the other things I wanted to ask you, and I really try to ask all tournament directors around any forms of media, is how you thought the World Series has been run over the last few years, if you want to comment that, and what you think could be better, what you think they're doing well, from your perspective as an outside tournament director.
Looking in from the outside is always easier than operating it. I mean, a 500-person tournament at $10,000 is enough stress. I can't imagine having 8,000 to 9,000. It certainly wouldn't be an easy task to make it go smoothly. You're always going to receive criticisms, but for what they have to deal with, I think they do definitely a decent job. It wouldn't be an easy animal to contain. It's, I mean, they certainly face a tough battle. There's some things definitely they could do better, but overall, I think they're doing a decent job.
Well, I want to know some wild stories. I mean, he's friend of Gavin. They must have gotten. I mean, they must have both gotten drunk and
segment
not found
Drinking
their way
with
home.
Gavin Smith. There's got to be some stuff you've.
The first time I met him, I brought up our regulations because we were in the audience of a tournament at Bellagio, and he was sitting directly behind me, and I hadn't met him yet. And he starts passing out drinks. He has a bottle of rye rum and vodka in front of him with mix, about 6 bottles of mix in front of him, and he's just passing out drinks to the audience. And that's how I first met Gavin, was passing me a drink in the audience.
I brought a traveling bar with me. It was
about 10 more years, he's going to be like every other one of those guys with the brown bag and the liquor in it, just sitting in the stands.
Yeah, that's what I'll do.
We'll make sure Gavin's taken care
I figure like times are good right now, and I buy a lot of people drinks. And I figure when times get bad in a few years, I got a lot coming back to me.
A lot coming back to you.
So I should be fine.
And that's when I brought up the regulations. Let him know that when he comes to our place, you can't bring your own alcohol.
But I was at the final table last year, and they did have a bar set up, and it was fine. I was able. It was actually very convenient to get drinks for the final table.
There's a bar set up here too, right? They got the same thing going on.
Although one of the funny regulations they had here the first day, they have a rule you can't eat at the table like you can often in the American terms. That's the same for the card room, the poker room. You can't eat at the table, which the first time I ever saw it was kind of gross looking, and then of course I became a slob like everyone else and started eating at the table. But the funny thing here was they had a rule you couldn't eat at the table, and then they put out a food spread.
Yeah, we did make an exception this year for the bigger games. We allowed people to eat at the table, but on a regular basis, it generally isn't the place that you want to see people.
That
eat.
reminds me of something I was going to ask you as well. Is that you actually can't have headphones at the table here? Is that right?
Correct. No electronic devices at all on the gaming floor.
And why is that? Just to try to protect the integrity of the game? I mean, it's allowed in most other casinos. I mean, down in the U.S.
Yeah, and I think in most places it's allowed until you hit the money. But here they don't allow them at all on a gaming floor, and that's to protect the integrity in case... I mean, there's a lot of money involved. People will try stuff.
Yeah.
And cameras and things like that are built into things for blackjack. I hope it doesn't happen, but I definitely could see it happening at some point.
It's actually funny because I'm on the World Series of Poker Committee, and we discuss this every 6 months or so. Mm-hmm. And they say, we've seen tapes of what people can do with, cell phones and with different things with electronic equipment, and could have headphones and be getting information. And that's why when you get to the money, we make people take it off. And then the next question is always, so what you're saying is it's okay for them to cheat until they get to the money.
Yes.
So it didn't seem like a consistent rule. Your rule, whether people like it or not, at least it seems more consistent. You just say, forget it. You just can't use them at all.
Yeah, and I mean, when I play, I like to wear headphones. I understand that people are passionate about it, but I completely understand the other side of it, because being on the other side, I've seen the damage that can be done in other areas.
You're in black. You haven't seen it in poker. You're just saying in black.
I have not seen it in poker, no.
Yeah, because I was thinking, I mean, especially in the cash games, too, where it would be kind of, I would think it would be a little bit difficult to, there's no cameras around, usually in the cash game floor, as opposed to a tournament, but they're not allowed up there either, right?
No.
Well, I'm assuming one way people cheat would just be by having an accomplice, even seeing someone's cards or doing something and telling them, that guy's got 2 jacks, just so you know.
Yeah, and we're very strict about the cell phones, too, because texting and messaging can be done back and forth, and that's why we're adamant about that.
Yeah, I got a pretty vicious look from the dealer last night when I was texting at the table. I'm like, this is a cash game. What are
That's
you talking
good.
about? They're like, get out, get that away.
I think
And I was
they
like,
knew you by your reputation.
I'm glad to hear they were following then.
Well, Jason, thank you very much for coming on the show, and good luck with the rest of the tournament. You've been running a really good ship.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
And we will be back to wrap things up here from Niagara Falls on PokerRoad Radio. And we are back here on day 4 of the North American Poker Championship in Niagara Falls. Barry Greenstein, one of 7 players remaining. To wrap things up, I wanted to ask you, because you said you were going to go over to a Halloween party at the local club here, the Dragonfly, last night. How'd that go?
Actually, I believe it or not, had forgotten it was Halloween. But I heard all these guys saying, hey, have you gone to the Dragonfly? It's a really neat place. And initially I thought it was a strip club. Normally when guys in the poker room are talking about neat places, they're strip clubs somewhere away from the casino. Then over time I found out, no, it's actually a nightclub. Excuse me. Over time I found out it was actually a nightclub inside the casino. So, or the properties. I don't know if you call it the casino. The casino's part where they play.
It's in the structure.
In the structure. Okay, so I said, okay, maybe, here I am with PokerRoad. That might be a fun thing. I'm sure Joe would be checking it out if he was here, and I'm supposed to be taking his place, right? So I said to Alice, why don't we go over to the Dragonfly? And she said, what's that? And I said, it's a nightclub. And she said, why do I want to go over there and see a bunch of 19-year-old girls? And I said, well, come on, you don't want me to go over there. If I go in there, those 19-year-old girls, how they just hang on poker players, professional poker players.
A lot of Asian girls in Canada, too.
That's right. We're just rock stars and everything. You don't want me to have to, beat them away, do you? You can at least defend me a little bit. And she said, well, I'm busy because, PokerRoad is kind of a family-run business. She's working on payroll and transportation to Foxwoods and all that kind of stuff. She said, I'm getting a lot of work done. I really don't want to go. Why don't you go on your own? So finally I said, okay, I'll go. So I put on my winter jacket because I had to walk across the street. I didn't feel like going on the thing they have from the hotel to the casino. And I walked across the street, windy, cold, get over, ready to get into the Dragonfly. Big imposing doors with these knockers that look like 15th century Europe. And I certainly couldn't open the door. And I said, I don't think they expect me to open that 20-ton door or whatever it is. And I saw there was a woman sweeping nearby. And I said, how do I get into this club? And she said, it's not open. I said, really? She said, no, it only opens on Tuesdays and the weekends. And they had their Halloween party yesterday. So that's not right. The day before Halloween, they had their Halloween party. And
it was good, too.
And I didn't even get told about it.
Yeah, it was a good party.
You were there?
Yeah, I was there.
Okay, well then.
You're just like that Curb Your Enthusiasm. You ever watch that show when Ted Danson shows up the night after the party? And he likes to say that he was there, but he didn't really want to go, so he showed up the night afterwards.
Yeah, well, nope, I haven't seen that, but
good one though, Martin.
Okay. But that is certainly a perfect analogy to what happened to me, and so then I came back sooner, at least Alex didn't have to worry that I was out for like 4 hours in this club. So
Yeah, and I did see you walking back through the poker room. And
I saw him walking back with girls hanging all over.
Oh,
him.
yeah.
Girls that also thought the club was open.
Well, that was true, but they weren't at the Dragonfly.
Just around. They were
just around,
To attract you. Well, that's going to do it for this show. Join us for our WPT final table preview. That will be up. And again, Barry Greenstein, good luck to you here. You got to make it through one more person to get over onto that final table. And we say goodbye to you from Niagara Falls on PokerRoad Radio.